The restaurant was almost empty, and yet I couldn't hear myself think over the sound of my own heartbeat. The waitress had just placed a steak knife beside my plate, but I hadn't ordered steak. I hadn't even ordered food yet. Across from me sat Remy, twirling her wine glass like she was trying to hypnotize it. Her nails were painted jet black, and they drummed against the stem with a rhythm that made me feel like I was being counted down. It was a small movement, but it was the only sign she was even alive. The rest of her frozen expression, her upright posture, looked like something sculpted out of ice. She hadn't spoken in 5 minutes. 5 minutes of silence in the middle of a candlelit dinner with a woman who once said I made her feel safe. Then she finally said it. Out loud. Clear as day. Stabbing me with a whisper. You're not my type. But she didn't just say it. She delivered it. Like a closing argument in a courtroom or the final click of a door that would never open again. I looked down. I wasn't crying, but my eyes felt full. Like my whole face was drowning. She didn't look at me. Just at the knife. The one she hadn't touched. The one that somehow now felt like it belonged in the middle of this conversation. So I did something I'd never done before. I stood up, mid-sentence, mid-thought, mid-heartbeat, and placed my credit card on the table. The waitress rushed over like she'd been waiting for that exact cue. I didn't say anything to Remy. Not even a take care. Just turned around and walked straight through the entrance and into the freezing night, where the streetlight flickered above me like it was trying to warn me. Don't look back. But here's the part that still messes me up. When I reached my car, there was already a sticky note under my windshield wiper. Folded, precise, like someone had taken their time. It read, "You should have known this was never about you." My hands shook. My stomach turned. I looked around. Nothing. No one. Just the shadows of the restaurant's windows, warped by condensation and candlelight. I sat in the driver's seat for an hour. Not crying. Not screaming. Just sitting. Frozen. Replaying her voice over and over in my mind, trying to remember the exact pitch of it when she said those 5 words. You're not my type. What did that even mean? That I wasn't dangerous enough? Not rich enough? Not broken enough for her to fix? The next morning, I found out the truth. She had never made the reservation. The name on the list wasn't hers. It wasn't even real. She brought me there under a false name. A false identity. Everything we had shared, if you could call it sharing, had been staged. Planned. And I wasn't her first. What followed would send me down a rabbit hole of fake aliases, manipulated men, and a pattern of psychological warfare that went way beyond heartbreak. She didn't just reject me. She dismantled me. The day after the dinner, I didn't go to work. I told my supervisor I had a stomach bug, which wasn't a total lie. My insides were in knots, just not for medical reasons. I spent the morning pacing my apartment, Marvin the cat staring at me like I'd finally lost it. I kept checking my phone, not because I expected Remy to text, but because I couldn't stop myself. Like some weak, desperate reflex. She hadn't blocked me, but she hadn't said a word either. And somehow, that was worse. At 3:42 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. No words, just a photo. I tapped it open, and I swear my knees buckled. It was a picture of me, taken the night before. I was sitting at the restaurant table, just as the waitress was dropping the check. The photo was shot from a distance, through the restaurant window, but it was crystal clear. You could see the way I was slouched, defeated, my hand frozen over the bill like I wasn't sure if I should pay or just crawl under the table. Whoever sent it had taken the shot deliberately, purposefully. I didn't even notice the second detail right away. In the reflection of the restaurant's glass, you could faintly see Remy. But it wasn't the Remy I sat across from. This version of her was smiling. Genuinely. Not the cold, mechanical mask she wore during our date. Her reflection almost looked amused. Like the moment had gone exactly as she planned. There was no message. No signature. Just the photo. I felt sick. I scoured the image for any clues. Was it from a surveillance camera? A friend? A stalker? But I knew the truth even before I admitted it. This wasn't random. It was a warning. That evening, I tried to dig into who she was. But here's the thing. Remy didn't exist. At least not the way she presented herself. The phone number she gave me didn't match her area code. The company she said she worked for had no public record of her employment. Her Instagram was gone, vanished overnight. No trace. No comments. Like it had been wiped clean. I went back to the dating app, but her profile was deactivated. She wasn't just done with me. She had erased herself entirely. I felt like a character in someone else's script, one I hadn't been given the lines for. I couldn't sleep that night. Every noise made me flinch. I checked my locks 3 times. I unplugged my router. I even covered my laptop camera with a sticky note, which I used to think only paranoid people did. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed again. A new number. This time, it was a video. I hesitated for a solid minute before pressing play. What showed up on screen was grainy and dimly lit, like it had been recorded in a parking garage. There was no sound, just the whir of the camera's movement. The video panned slowly across a row of cars until it stopped on mine. My old, dented Ford Fusion. And hanging from my rearview mirror was a familiar object I had thrown away months ago. A small stuffed penguin. It used to belong to my ex-wife. I tossed it after the divorce, thinking I was purging the memories. I hadn't seen it in years. And now it was inside my locked car. That's when I realized this wasn't heartbreak. This wasn't about rejection or ego or even revenge. This was a game, and I was playing it without knowing the rules. I reported the video to the police the next morning. They asked if I had enemies. I almost laughed. Me? Elwood? The guy who forgets to update his browser extensions and listens to birdwatching podcasts? I told them it was probably a prank. They took my statement, gave me a case number, and told me to stay aware. But staying aware wasn't the problem. The problem was that I couldn't stop wondering, what did she want? Because if it was just to humiliate me, she'd already done that. So why was she still watching? 3 days after receiving the parking garage video, I stopped answering unknown numbers altogether. I silenced my notifications, deleted the dating app permanently, and left my phone face down on the coffee table unless it rang with my brother's name. I even considered moving. Somewhere far, somewhere anonymous, maybe Vermont, where no one knows what creative branding even means. But the thing about fear is it doesn't wait outside your door. It lets itself in, quietly, and it sits with you like it belongs. I wasn't just afraid of Remy anymore. I was afraid of how easily she had slipped past my life's thin walls. How one dinner with a woman I barely knew had spiraled into a waking hallucination. And yet, I couldn't stop digging. I had to know who she really was. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I couldn't sleep until I made some sense of this madness. So I did something I had promised myself I wouldn't do. I called my ex-wife. Her name's Mallory. We hadn't spoken in nearly 2 years. The divorce had been mutual, but it still left bruises we never really examined. She picked up on the 3rd ring and said, "Elwood?" Like she had expected someone to call, but hoped it wouldn't be me. I told her I needed her help, that I might be in trouble, that someone was playing some kind of psychological game with me, and I didn't know why. She didn't hang up. That was something. After I described everything, from the dinner to the penguin in the car, there was a long pause. Then Mallory asked, "Did she say your full name?" I froze. "No," I said slowly. "She only called me Elwood." "Then she knew it already," she replied, her voice sharper than I remembered. "Because you never told me your last name on our first date either." She was right. It had taken me 3 weeks to tell her my full name because I was still embarrassed by it. But Remy never asked. She knew from the start. That's when I realized I was never the one doing the choosing. I had been chosen. Later that evening, I drove to the restaurant where Remy and I had met. I parked across the street, engine running, and just watched it for nearly an hour. Nothing happened. No familiar faces, no strange notes. But when I finally worked up the nerve to walk in and ask the hostess if she remembered us, she blinked at me and said, "You were here last week with Mr. Keller, right?" "Mr. Keller?" I asked, confused. She looked embarrassed. "Sorry, I just assumed. He was asking about you." I asked for a description. She told me he was tall, bald, had a wrist burn, like he'd pressed it against a stove. Said he only stayed for a few minutes and left when he saw I hadn't shown up. Except I had never made plans to meet anyone there again. Not even her. This was something new. Now someone else was looking for me. The next day, I received a brown envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. It was a photocopy of a police report. A missing person report. Remy's name wasn't listed, but her photo was. Only, her name was Lena Whitlow. Missing since 2016. Declared deceased in 2021. Last seen boarding a train in Denver, Colorado. I stared at the paper, so long my vision blurred. The file said she was 28 when she vanished. The girl I had dinner with couldn't have been a day older. So who the hell did I meet? How could someone who was legally dead be sitting across from me, sipping wine, calling me sweet, and telling me I wasn't her type like it was a joke. And more importantly, who was Mr. Keller? And what did he want from me? Everything I thought was strange before, her smile, the erased accounts, the photo, the penguin, it all suddenly shifted into something deeper, more deliberate. I wasn't being stalked anymore. I was being studied. 2 days passed after I found the missing person report. I didn't show it to the police. Something inside me knew it would only complicate things. I mean, what would I even say? Hi. Yes, I had dinner with a woman who's legally dead. No, I didn't know her before that. Yes, she left a penguin in my car. No, I'm not hallucinating. Right. That'd go well. Instead, I locked it in my desk drawer, beneath tax receipts and an unopened birthday card from my aunt. I told myself I needed time to think. But I didn't think. I just wandered. I drove through neighborhoods I'd never been to. I sat in gas station parking lots for hours, staring at nothing. I listened to voicemail messages on loop just to hear familiar voices. There was something off about the world now. As if it had tilted slightly, and I was the only one walking uphill. On the third night, I returned home after midnight and found my front door unlocked. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, my hand on the knob, listening. The hallway was dark and still. I pushed the door open slowly. Every sound, creak, shift, even the hum of the refrigerator, made my skin crawl. I did what I could to act brave. I flipped every light switch. I checked every closet, every corner, every drawer. Marvin was asleep on the windowsill like nothing had happened, which weirdly made me feel worse. Like I was the only one tuned into whatever frequency this madness was broadcasting on. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken. But something was different. I didn't notice it until I walked past the bookshelf in the hallway, the one I always ignored. I stopped cold. A new book sat on the middle shelf. Thick spine. No title. Just a black leather cover with a small piece of red thread sticking out like a bookmark. I hadn't bought it. I knew that with absolute certainty. I picked it up carefully. It was heavy. Worn, but not dusty. I opened it, and what I saw inside didn't make sense. Every page was handwritten. Tight, neat cursive. Like someone had spent years copying something over and over. The words weren't in English, or at least, not in any language I recognized. Symbols, loops, vertical lines. Occasionally, there would be a sketch. A train station. A staircase. A window. On the 10th page, I found something that stopped my breath entirely, a hand-drawn map. Of my apartment. Not a general sketch, an exact floor plan. Outlets. Pipes. Even Marvin's food dish was marked. And then I saw something else. A small square drawn along the back hallway wall. Labeled with the same strange script I couldn't translate. I turned to look in that direction. There was no door there. Just a plain stretch of white drywall. But the map said otherwise. I took a flashlight and ran my fingers over the surface. Smooth. Cold. But when I knocked, it sounded hollow, thinner than the rest. My stomach turned. My heart was racing so fast it felt like my ribs were vibrating. And then my phone lit up. A single text. You're close. No name. No number. Just those 2 words. I dropped the flashlight. It clattered on the floor, rolling toward the wall. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I drove straight to the community records office. I wanted to see if there had ever been a renovation on my apartment. Maybe a door had been sealed off years ago. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was losing my mind. The clerk, a woman named Brenna who smelled like lemon and printer ink, found the original building blueprints. She looked at me suspiciously when I said I was doing light remodeling, but she handed them over anyway. And there it was. A room. A tiny one. Roughly 6 by 8 feet, tucked between the hallway wall and the unit next door. Labeled only once, Observation Chamber, Unit 6B. That's my unit. I asked her what that meant, if it was a leftover term from construction or storage. She shook her head slowly. This building used to be owned by a psychological research firm in the early 90s, she said. They tested out weird layouts to study stress and spatial orientation. Most of that stuff got gutted when the units were renovated. But the room's still there? I asked, already knowing the answer. She nodded. Yeah, but there's no way in. She was wrong. There was a way in. I just hadn't found it yet. But someone else already had. And they were waiting for me to knock. I didn't go to work the next day. I didn't even call in. I just sat in the middle of my living room, lights off, blinds drawn, staring at the hallway wall like it had whispered something in the dark, and I was waiting for it to speak again. Marvin curled up on the couch behind me, completely unfazed by the fact that his owner might be slipping into full-blown madness. I had every reason to walk away. I could have packed a bag, driven north, gotten a room at some cheap lakeside motel where no one asked questions. But that would have been surrender. And the truth was, I needed to know. Not just about the room. Not just about Remy, or Lena, or whoever she really was. I needed to know why me. Why someone like me, an average, unimpressive man with a ruined love life and a desk job, had become the target of something that didn't feel like chance. So I did something I swore I wouldn't do. I got out a hammer and began tapping against the wall. Gently at first. I didn't want to cause damage, just find weakness. A seam. A soft spot. Somewhere drywall had been patched, painted over, forgotten. And after maybe 15 minutes, just as I was starting to second-guess myself, I found it. Near the floor, behind a framed photo of my niece's birthday party, there was a rectangular section that echoed differently than the rest. Not quite hollow, but less dense. I took a screwdriver, wedged it in the corner, and began to pry. Dust rained down. The edge cracked. And within seconds, a narrow panel popped loose and fell forward with a dull thud against the hardwood. Behind it, darkness. But not endless darkness. There was a shallow cavity, about 2 feet deep and 3 feet high. Inside, there was no equipment. No pipes. No camera. Just a single metal box. Rusted, dented, and locked with a small latch. It looked too old to belong in a modern wall. Too intentional. I pulled it out carefully. Carried it to the kitchen. My hands were shaking, but I didn't care. Whatever was inside, I was done being afraid of it. The latch was loose. I didn't need a key. Inside was a bundle of folded papers, aged and yellowing. Beneath them, a Polaroid photograph. And beneath that, a small cassette tape, the kind I hadn't seen since middle school. I unfolded the first sheet. It was a letter, handwritten in thick blue ink. But the name at the top didn't say Dear Elwood. It said Dear Observer. The handwriting was sharp, slanted, and disturbingly calm. The letter read, If you're reading this, the sequence has completed. You were chosen not for your talents, not for your intellect, but for your predictability. The subject responds best to stability paired with detachment. You are not the first, and likely not the last. Your emotional profile indicated suitability for Stage 3 immersion. Your reactions have been monitored since initial contact. The dinner served as the primer. The response to dismissal, recorded. The behavioral shifts following object placement, measured. The appearance of the dormant token, penguin, confirmed emotional regression, which was anticipated. The appearance of this note signals the successful completion of passive observation phase. Your next action will determine whether escalation is necessary. Most respond with confusion, a few with aggression. Rarely, some comply. Choose wisely. Do not contact her again. She no longer exists. I stared at the words for several minutes, unable to process whether I was reading some twisted piece of performance art or the diary of a mad scientist. Then I looked at the Polaroid. It was me, sitting in my car. Same jacket. Same night I got the penguin photo. Except the angle, it wasn't from the parking garage. It was from the back seat. Someone had been inside my car. Behind me, taking photos while I sat there, unaware. My stomach turned violently. I stood up so fast my chair fell backward. I wanted to scream, but my voice was trapped somewhere between my ribs and my throat. Then I noticed something. Written on the back of the photograph, in the same blue ink. You never locked the back door. I ran. Sprinting down the hallway, I reached the rear entrance of my apartment, the door I rarely used. I grabbed the handle. It turned easily. Unlocked. My legs went weak. I dropped to the floor, panting, staring up at the ceiling as a thought I hadn't dared consider came crashing through like a wrecking ball. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't about rejection or humiliation. It was a program, and I was inside it. But who was she, and who was watching? I looked back at the cassette. I didn't have a player, but I knew someone who might. Someone who owed me a favor from years ago, and someone who once told me he used to work for a government research facility that didn't officially exist. If anyone could make sense of this, it was the man I swore I'd never speak to again. I hadn't spoken to Silas in over 12 years. The last time we'd seen each other, it was during a weekend retreat in Vermont with our old college group, a miserable gathering of mismatched personalities that ended with Silas punching a window and swearing off the East Coast forever. We were opposites back then, I was a cautious IT major who double-checked every coffee lid before sipping. Silas? He was the kind of guy who'd call you at 3 a.m. from a payphone in Mexico just to tell you the moon looked different. He also claimed to have worked for a project buried 3 floors below plausible deniability. I never knew what that meant, and I never wanted to ask. Until now. I drove 3 hours to a crumbling ranch house tucked in the folds of New Hampshire, where time had chewed on the porch steps and birds nested inside the chimney. He was expecting me. That part chilled me before I even rang the doorbell. I hadn't texted or called. No one even knew I still had his address. But when I knocked, he opened the door before the second knock landed. "You took longer than I thought," Silas said. He hadn't aged a day, and that somehow made it worse. Still wiry, still barefoot, still wearing that same threadbare hoodie with Error 404 written across the chest. His eyes had the kind of stillness that made you feel like he wasn't looking at you. He was scanning you. "I brought something," I said. "You brought it," he corrected. He led me inside without a word, down a narrow hallway that smelled of cedar and electricity. His living room looked like a hybrid between a radio station and a bunker. Ancient equipment stacked on every surface, VHS tapes labeled in code, and wires that ran like veins through the carpet. I handed him the cassette. He turned it over once, twice, then gave me a nod like a priest receiving a confession. No questions, just purpose. He popped it into a dusty silver-taped deck, pressed play, and sat back. At first, just static. Then a hum, low, constant, mechanical. Then a voice. My blood turned to ice. It was my voice. Tuesday, February 9th. Approximate. 3:15 p.m. Subject appears to be stable. No deviation in behavioral markers since insertion of catalyst. Emotional reaction to dismissal phrase consistent with pre-screening. Phase 1 complete. Awaiting environmental stressor sequence. I grabbed the table to steady myself. "What the hell is this?" I whispered. Silas paused the tape. "Keep listening." The voice continued. "Subject is compliant. Pattern of introspection observed. Unlikely to resist progression without external interference. Memory loop intact. Control statement confirmed. Subject's lack of awareness remains total. He believes the name Remy was his choice. It was not. I felt my heart crawling up my throat. "Silas, that's me. That's my voice. But I've never said those things. I never recorded this." He didn't answer right away. He pulled out a folder from under the table, thick with clippings, reports, diagrams. He tossed it on the table and pointed at the top page. I leaned in. It was a scan of a university ethics waiver. Signed by me. Except I had never seen it in my life. "Back in college," Silas said slowly, "there was a study. A massive one. Something about digital personas, behavioral scaffolding, feedback conditioning. Mostly funded by a private defense contractor no one ever names out loud. They ran it under the guise of a media internship program. You were part of the intake group." "No," I said flatly. "I wasn't." He handed me another page. My old student ID photo. My signature. The same blue ink I saw on the letter in the wall. "You don't remember it," he said, "because they didn't want you to. They segmented it, boxed it up in your subconscious, and left breadcrumbs so tiny you'd never notice. Until they activated it." My hands were shaking uncontrollably now. "So what was it?" I asked. "What was I part of?" He leaned in close. "They were testing reprogramming, but not for criminals. For civilians. For people who needed to forget what they once agreed to remember. But something about your case went quiet. Like someone pulled you out early. I never found out why. And Remy." He paused. Her real name was Lena. She was one of the internal observers, until she vanished during a failed Phase 3. Disappeared completely. But if she resurfaced with you, that means you were her subject. And now the program wants her back. Everything inside me cracked. It wasn't about rejection. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about control. I wasn't part of a sick joke. I was part of a controlled collapse, designed to study emotional detachment after romantic fracture. Only I wasn't supposed to know. And neither was Lena. But somehow, both of us had broken through. The tape clicked off. Silas looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years. "Fear. You need to leave, Elwood. Now. Because if they know you listen to this, they're already on their way." I turned toward the door. But my phone buzzed. One new message. No number. Just a single image. It was a live photo. Of me. In Silas's house. From behind. The photo on my phone wasn't just unsettling. It was impossible. My back, my posture, the way my head tilted slightly towards Silas as he reached for the tape. It had been taken in that exact moment, which meant the person taking it had been in the room with us. Not outside, not in the window, inside. I stood, spun, scanned the walls, the ceiling, every possible shadow behind Silas's cluttered equipment. But there was no one, no sound, no open doors, nothing but the eerie hum of old machines and Silas's rusted wind chimes tapping lightly in the breeze. Silas saw the photo over my shoulder, and his expression turned to stone. "They're accelerating it," he muttered. "They must think you're a breach." "A breach?" I asked. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, already shoving the cassette back into its box, "they no longer think you're just a subject. You're a variable, an uncontrolled node, and they'll either lock you back in, or they'll erase you completely." I didn't have time to ask what erase meant, because just then, every light in his house flickered and went out. A deep mechanical click echoed from somewhere in the basement. Silas grabbed a flashlight, tossed me a backpack with 3 canisters inside. He didn't explain what they were, and I didn't ask, and shoved open a trapdoor beneath the rug in the kitchen. "Tunnel," he said. "I built it after I saw the first protocol leak." We crawled into darkness. The air was stale and wet. The dirt walls pressed in on all sides. I could hear Silas muttering numbers under his breath, like coordinates. The tunnel stretched forever. I don't know how long we moved, 5 minutes, maybe 10. I lost track of time in the dark. My knees were shredded by the ground, my breathing shallow, every heartbeat a hammer in my chest. Then we emerged, into a tool shed behind a cemetery, one I'd never seen before. The sun was rising. Pale blue light lit the world like it hadn't been part of the same nightmare. Silas handed me a phone. Burner. Prepaid. He also gave me an envelope with cash and a small metal key with no markings. "This opens a lockbox at the Rosedale train station. You'll go there. You'll find the locker. Inside is something you once wrote, before they made you forget. Read it. Only then will you understand why she chose you." I shook my head. "This is too much. I never asked for any of this. I didn't do anything." Silas turned to me, and for the first time, his voice cracked. "You did one thing," he said. "You responded emotionally. That's all they ever needed." He closed the shed door behind me. I heard the lock click from the inside. When I turned around, I realized I was alone in a cemetery that didn't appear on any map I checked later. There were no names on the stones. Just numbers. Rows and rows of numbers. I took the first train to Rosedale. My hands never stopped shaking. Every time someone looked at me too long, I assumed they were part of it. Every time the train car shifted or groaned, I expected gas or blinking lights, or someone to pull me out of reality and back into the maze. But no one came. At the station, I found locker 23C, inserted the key, and opened the box. Inside was a stack of typed pages and a red pen. On the first page, in all caps, it said, "Project, Vigilant Heart. Subject log, Elwood Fisher, Phase 3 Initiation." I read the first few lines. My own thoughts, my own writing, but written in a version of my voice that sounded younger, sharper, less afraid. Day 1. Subject believes emotional pain must be avoided at all costs. That belief must be challenged. Test group includes pre-coded emotional triggers. Test goal: establish whether rejection leads to collapse, regression, or awakening. Project supervisor: L. Whitlow. That name, Lena Whitlow. She hadn't just observed me. She hadn't just chosen me. She had designed the test. She created the illusion, the date, the dismissal, the humiliation, all of it. She was never a participant. She was the architect. But the next page flipped the entire truth on its head. Day 27. Unexpected deviation. Subject shows emotional anchoring. Signs of synthetic memory fracture. Remy, alias, has broken proximity code. She initiated contact outside of protocol. Intent unknown. Emotional resonance logged. Subject exhibits signs of affection. Affection? I kept flipping. Day 29. Protocol breach confirmed. Remy has not reported in. She's gone. Subject continues to spiral. Tape recording to be embedded for audit. Begin shutdown procedure. Subject may require extraction if public exposure risk increases. They had shut her down. Because she went rogue. Because she started to feel something too. I stumbled back, clutching the pages like they were fire. None of this made sense anymore. I wasn't just studied. I wasn't just manipulated. I was loved, maybe, and then used. And she vanished trying to protect me. Or maybe I was wrong about all of it. The last page was handwritten, in the same careful cursive I saw on the letter in the wall. But this time, it was signed. They'll tell you I built the maze. But I only opened a door. You chose to walk in. I stayed because I needed you to see. The question isn't, why me? It's, why now? You still have one last key. Use it. L? There was no key in the box. Until I looked down. Taped beneath the lid was a second, smaller key. Silver. Cold. Shaped like a house key. Attached to it was a tag. You've been here before. 9, Alder Lane. I knew that address. It was the house I grew up in. The one my parents sold after my senior year. I hadn't set foot there in 20 years. And yet, I could still feel the front door handle in my palm. The road to 9, Alder Lane felt both familiar and foreign. Trees I hadn't thought about since childhood passed by my window like ghosts waving in slow motion. The house wasn't exactly as I remembered it. Someone had painted it navy blue, added a white porch swing, and replaced the gravel driveway with concrete. But the bones were still there. The slanted roof. The crooked mailbox. The wind chimes that used to terrify me during storms. It was like stepping into an old photograph someone had touched up with memory. But what shook me most was the light. There was a light on inside. And I hadn't told a single soul I was coming. The gate creaked as I opened it. The porch steps groaned under my weight. My hand trembled as I reached for the key. For a second, I just stood there, key inches from the lock, unsure if I was about to open a door to truth or madness. I inserted it. The door clicked open like it had been waiting for years. Inside, the air was still. No dust, no rot. Just quiet. And warmth. The living room had been restored to exactly how it looked when I was 10 years old. Same olive green sofa. Same warped coffee table. Same little wooden duck that used to sit by the fireplace. I couldn't make sense of it, how this place had been frozen in time, untouched by owners or seasons. And then I heard her voice. Hey, Elle? Soft. Real. Unmistakably her. I turned. She stood in the kitchen doorway, barefoot, wearing the same maroon sweater from the dinner that started everything. But her face was different now. No longer cold, no longer unreadable. It was the face of someone who had finally stopped running. Remy, I whispered. She smiled sadly. Lena, actually. But I think I liked the way you said Remy better. I wanted to speak, scream, fall to my knees, ask 100 questions. But she stepped forward and placed a hand gently on my chest. You're safe now, she said. They stopped watching 2 nights ago. I blinked, unsure I heard right. They abandoned the sequence, she explained. You weren't supposed to last this long. They assumed you'd unravel before the 5th trigger. But you didn't. You kept choosing to understand. You kept choosing to feel. That made you. And profitable. But what was all of this? I asked. Why me? She looked down. Because I chose you. Years ago. Before they ever assigned me to your file. You were never meant to be part of this. I altered the parameters. I thought I could protect you by staying close. But when I started to care for real, they pulled me out. They erased me from every node they could access. Her eyes welled. But you kept remembering anyway. I felt my knees give. She caught me. We sat on the old sofa together, just breathing in the stillness. She handed me a small flash drive from her pocket. It has everything, she said. The files, the records, the truth. The real truth. If you want to go public, you can. But if you'd rather let it die here, we can do that too. I stared at the flash drive for a long time. Then I placed it gently on the coffee table, beside the wooden duck. I think I just want peace, I said quietly. She smiled. Then we disappear, she said. And we did. We left the house that night with nothing but backpacks and memories we no longer needed to question. We drove north, then west, changed names, cut cards, and walked into a life that belonged entirely to us. I bought a used pickup. She adopted a stray dog. Marvin, of course, came along for the ride. We settled near a lake with no cell reception, where the birds were louder than traffic and the sky changed colors just to show off. Sometimes, I still wake up in a sweat, thinking I'm back in the program. But then I feel her beside me, breathing steady, heartbeat calm, and I remember that I'm free. Not because they let me go. Because I walked out on my own. It turns out, I was never their type either. And thank God for that.